Here's a complete guide for all the Shadeflicker family fighter battles. There'll be timestamps in the description so you can easily jump to the battle you're looking for. First up, we have Aquatic Assault. Your first pet is a mongoose. This one needs to have a speed above 328 with gnaw, screech and dive. Your second pet is a gulp froglet with swarm. And your final pet is a fen crab or similar pet. Higher the power here the better. Also this needs to have less health than your gulp froglet with rip and blood in the water. Start with your mongoose and cast screech. Shadeflicker will use void gate and swap you to your gulp froglet. With your gulp froglet in the battle, cast swarm. The first round of swarm will hit. The second round will be dodged. And the third and final round will again hit. After this, Shadeflicker will cast Void Gate and switch in your fen crab or similar pet. With your crab in the battle, cast Rip, followed by Blood in the Water, and then pass or anything. Shadeflicker will swap you out to your mongoose. With your mongoose back in the battle, cast Gnaw, Shadeflicker will now use dodge, so cast dive. Once dive hits, Shadeflicker should be defeated. Next up we have Beast Blitz. For this we'll be using any snake with a speed above 328 with hiss, and then any other abilities. These are unlikely to be used. Your second pet is a cinder pup with flame breath, crouch and volcano. And your final pet is any Zandalari pet with hunting party and primal cry. This one also needs to have the same or less health than your cinder pup. Start with your snake and cast hiss. Shadeflicker will use void gate and swap you to your cinder pup. With your cinder pup in the battle, start with flame breath, followed by crouch, and then volcano. Shadeflicker will now use void gate and force in your Zandalari pet. Cast primal cry, followed by hunting party. Sometimes your Zandalari pet can be defeated before Shadeflicker uses void gate again. If this is the case, bring in your cinder pup and cast flame breath. After Shadeflicker uses void gate, your snake should be forced in. Just cast hiss if needed to finish off Shadeflicker. Next up is Critical Critters. All your pets for this battle need to have a speed above 328. Your first pet is any rabbit with scratch or flurry, dodge and burrow. Your second pet is any critter pet with scratch and stampede. And your final pet is another rabbit with scratch, dodge and stampede. Start with your first rabbit and cast burrow. This avoids being swapped out by void gate. Follow this with dodge, and then use scratch or flurry until this rabbit is defeated. Once your first rabbit is defeated, bring in your second pet and cast Stampede. You'll hit with one round of Stampede before being swapped out by Void Gate to your final rabbit. When your final rabbit is in the battle, cast Scratch, followed by Dodge, and then Stampede. All 3 rounds of Stampede should hit before this rabbit is defeated. When this happens, your second pet will re-enter the battle. Just use Scratch until Shadeflicker is defeated. Now for Draconic Destruction. This one can be quite RNG, so will probably take a bunch of tries to get it to work. Your first pet is Creminius with Bite, Howl and Surge of Power. Your second pet is a Twilight Clutch Sister with Tail Sweep, Prismatic Barrier and Twilight Meteorite. And your final pet is Ular with Breath and Life Exchange. A Nether Fairy Dragon can be used instead with Arcane Blast and Life Exchange. Start with your Creminius and pass. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Twilight Clutch Sister. Cast Prismatic Barrier and then change to your Ular or Nether Fairy Dragon. With Ular in the battle, cast Breath. Followed by a second Breath. And then a third Breath. After the third Breath, swap to your Creminius. If Ular was defeated, you'll need to restart. Creminius will then be hit by Void Gate and your Twilight Clutch Sister will be forced back in. Again, cast Prismatic Barrier and swap back to Ular. With Ular back in the battle, cast Life Exchange and then use Breath until defeated. Once defeated, bring in Creminius. Cast Surge of Power. If Ular was killed early, this will hit, if not it won't. You'll then be swapped back to your Twilight Clutch Sister. Again, start with Prismatic Barrier. Then pass one round. Now use Tail Sweep. Followed by Twilight Meteorite. As long as Shadeflicker has less than 549 health, this will finish it off. Next up is Elemental Escalation. Your first pet is a Doom Bloom with Bite, Consume Corpse and Stun Seed. Your second pet is a Crazy Carrot with Iron Bark and Blistering Cold. And your final pet is an Ominous Flame with Scorched Earth and Foreboding Curse. Start with Doom Bloom and pass or anything the first round. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Crazy Carrot. With your Crazy Carrot in the battle, cast Iron Bark, followed by Blistering Cold. And then pass or anything, Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Ominous Flame. With your Ominous Flame in the battle, start with a Foreboding Curse, followed by Scorched Earth, and then Foreboding Curse again. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Doom Bloom. With your Doom Bloom in the battle, start with Stun Seed, followed by Consume Corpse. Shadeflicker will have Dodge active, so can't be hit anyway. And then Bite. Shadeflicker will then use Void Gate and force in your Crazy Carrot. Just cast Iron Bark until Shadeflicker is defeated, which should happen from the damage from the Scorched Earth weather effect and the Blistering Cold debuffs. This may take a few tries, but will usually work. Now for Fierce Fliers. Your first pet is a Mechanical Axebeak. The higher the power here the better, with Haywire and Decoy. Your second pet is a Direbeak Hatchling, with Falcasaur Swarm, Iron Skin and Predatory Strike. And your final pet is a Bloodgazer Hatchling, with Falcasaur Swarm and Predatory Strike. Start with your mechanical axe beak and cast Decoy. And then bring in your Direbeak hatchling. Start with Iron Skin, followed by Falcosaur Swarm. You will hit with one round of Falcosaur Swarm before being swapped back to your mechanical axe beak by Void Gate. With your axe beak back in the battle, cast Haywire. You will hit both times with Haywire, which will do a lot of damage to Shadeflicker. Then pass or anything, Shadeflicker will use Void Gate, defeat your axe beak, and force in your Blood Gazer hatchling. Cast Falcosaur Swarm. One round will hit, the second round will be dodged. After Falcosaur Swarm is finished, cast Predatory Strike. This will finish off Shadeflicker. Next up is Humanoid Havoc. This one can be a bit RNG, so will probably take you a few tries to get it to work. Your first pet is a Harpy Youngling with Quills and Liftoff. Your second pet is a Dandelion Frolicker. This one needs to have 1546 health with Scratch, Bark Skin and Dazzling Dance. And your final pet is Turkey with Acid Touch and Stampede. Start with your Harpy Youngling and pass or anything. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Dandelion Frolicker. With the Frolicker in the battle, cast Dazzling Dance, followed by Bark Skin, and then Scratch. Shadeflicker will then use Void Gate and force in Turkey. With Turkey in the battle, start with Acid Touch, followed by Stampede. You'll get 2 rounds of Stampede off before being forced out by Void Gate to your Harpy Youngling. With your Harpy in the battle, cast Quills, followed by Liftoff. Shadeflicker will have used Dodge, so will be unattackable. After Liftoff has hit, Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Dandelion Frolicker. Cast Dazzling Dance. Your Frolicker will then be defeated. When this happens, bring in Turkey. And cast Stampede. Turkey will then be defeated and your Harpy will re-enter. Just use Quills to finish off Shadeflicker. Next up is Magical Mayhem. Your first pet is a Sapphire Cub with Pounce and Screech. Your second pet is a Mini Mindslayer with Eye Blast, Inner Vision and Life Exchange. And your final pet is a Netherspace Abyssal with Immolate, Explode and Navigate. Start with your Sapphire Cub and cast Screech. Shadeflicker will then use Void Gate and force in your Mini Mindslayer. With your Mindslayer in the battle, start with Life Exchange, followed by Inner Vision, and then Eye Blast. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Netherspace Abyssal. With your Abyssal in the battle, start with Immolate, followed by Nethergate, and then Explode. After using Explode, bring in your Sapphire Cub, cast Pounce. Shadeflicker will then use Dodge, so will be unattackable. Swap to your Mini Mindslayer, which will then be defeated and your Sapphire Cub will re-enter. Cast Pounce until Shadeflicker is defeated. Now for mechanical melee. Your first pet can be any level 25 mechanical pet. If you have one with charge, use that. It's not needed, so if you don't have one, don't worry. Your remaining 2 pets are Dark Moon Zeppelins, both with missile, explode and decoy. Start with your first pet and cast charge if available, otherwise pass. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your first Dark Moon Zeppelin. Start with decoy. Then pass 1 round. Now cast missile. Followed by a second missile. And then explode. After using explode, bring in your first pet and cast charge if available. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your remaining Zeppelin. With your second Zeppelin in the battle, do the same rotation as before. That was decoy to start, followed by passing 1 round, then missile, followed by a second missile, and then explode. This should finish off Shadeflicker. And finally, Unstoppable Undead. Your first pet is an infected squirrel with Stampede and Creeping Fungus. Your second pet is Mr. Bigglesworth with Claw and Ice Barrier, and your final pet is Son of Seth with Plagued Blood, Touch of the Animus and Drain Blood. Start with your infected squirrel and pass the first round. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in Mr. Bigglesworth. With Mr. Bigglesworth in the battle, cast Ice Barrier and then swap to your Son of Seth. With your Son of Seth in the battle, cast Touch of the Animus followed by Drain Blood and then Plague Blood. Followed by pass or anything. Shadeflicker will use Void Gate and force in your Mr. Bigglesworth. With Mr. Bigglesworth back in the battle, again cast Ice Barrier and then swap to your infected squirrel. With your squirrel in the battle, start with Creeping Fungus, followed by Stampede. You'll hit with 2 rounds of Stampede before Shadeflicker uses Void Gate and forces in your Mr. Bigglesworth. Your squirrel will likely be defeated here. With Mr. Bigglesworth back in the battle, again cast Ice Barrier and then swap to your Son of Seth. This time start with Drain Blood followed by Touch of the Animus and then Plague Blood if needed. This should finish off Shadeflicker. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, comment and subscribe. It helps out more than you know. Thanks for watching.